Good afternoon and welcome to Free West Media YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're looking forward to some very interesting conversations on this channel that are going to be rolled out in the next few days and weeks. And this afternoon, I've got the honor of speaking to Nicole Barlow. She's an author and commentator. She's got some very interesting things to say. And that's the topic of today. The ANC never abandoned its armed struggle. Is that a statement that you could agree to, Nicole?
Oh, yes, absolutely, Dan. There's no doubt about the fact that they have never abandoned their armed struggle. They just basically term it the National Democratic Revolution. But at the end of the day, it's just another guise or disguise for an armed struggle. And although people will say, oh, well, the armed struggle by definition has to be planting bombs and car bombs and killing people and taking up arms. Well, it doesn't actually, because they've just adapted their revolution. They've just changed it from being planting bombs and killing people. Well, not necessarily if you divide it, but they have just taken their revolution and shaped it in another way. And what they've done is because, I mean, all you need to do is listen to their rhetoric, constant rhetoric about the poor and the redistribution and the economy. Fine, absolutely wonderful. But how do you use democratic and revolution in the same sentence? They counter one another out. They're like incongruous. They don't, it's inconsistent. If you want a democracy and you want rule of law and you want a government that is supported by the ballot box, by definition, you can't have a revolution because a revolution is conflict. Whether it be armed or whether it be otherwise, it's conflict. You are in conflict with something in your country. So why, when Julius Malema stands up and says, we need the revolution, you're like, okay, what revolution? We don't have an external enemy. We don't. We have nobody invading our country. So that means the revolution and the enemy, because by definition, if you're having a revolution, you have to have an enemy. Otherwise, who are you fighting? Yourself? So your enemy has got to be within. So who's your enemy now? The people of South Africa, all the people of South Africa, or just the white people? But when you consider how many people we're having murdered every day in the country, it's obviously against the entire country. And I think the thing is that when you the notion that the ANC is trying to build a more equitable and just society doesn't marry with their actions. So every single time the ANC does something, it will be counterintuitive to what is in the best interests of the country and for what is in the best interests of the poor. And so when they envision the revolution as an ongoing process, because trust me when I tell you, in 1994, the ANC did not give up their revolution. Mandela might have been willing to sort of cross the Rubicon and decide that, okay, we're not going to have a civil war, along with de Klerk. I mean, you know my feelings on de Klerk, weak, gave up, didn't do anything, didn't fight the good fight and all the rest of it. And maybe from that side, and Mbeki and that, two individual people managed to transition to being semi-statesmen. The rest of your members of the ANC are exactly the same as they were. They are quasi-terrorists. Zuma stands up, chants that's about revolution, and Sumiwa about his
Don't give me
machine gun,
Umshini Wami, give me my machine gun.
Mshiniwami. Yeah, my machine gun. Why? Who are you going to shoot? Your own people? Who are you in conflict with? This is the big thing. The ANC assumed political control of the country, but the application of these revolutionary ideas became increasingly problematic because the thing is, you're supposed to have a democratic framework, which means that if you want to oust your government, you do so through the ballot box. You don't do so through through the barrel of a gun. But yet the ANC still wants to do that. And the NDR, with its roots in the liberation struggle, never formally ended. And even when you hear Ramaphosa speak, every single time he speaks, there's a revolutionary undertone to his comments. Absolutely everything. The ANC's continued insistence on revolutionary transformation, radical economic policies such as nationalization, land reform, that's an implicit threat, a constant implicit threat of violence. Because how are you going to take people's land away unless you use violence?
Yes, you're
You
quite right.
cannot.
It sort of feels to me almost. Have you ever seen that Italian documentary movie? It was quite controversial at one point, called Africa Addio. It's sort of an
No, I
Italian.
haven't.
Yeah, I'll actually give you a link to it and whatever. But
Yeah, I'd like to
it's
watch it.
about the early the, what would you call it, the decolonization or the early independence of a lot of these African states, including the Congo, and Kenya and others, the Mau Mau in Kenya.
Yes, the Mama
And
Revolution. Yeah.
yes, and there are a lot of gruesome scenes in the movie, but there's one also with 5,000 Arab traders in Zanzibar who were massacred. And apparently they were massacred because of something that happened 1,000 years ago. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
revenge for an event 1,000 years ago. And there was it feels almost to me as if we experiencing some kind of we heading for some sort of Africa Addio moment in South Africa, because there's also this stuff about the past and we've got to avenge the past or set it right. And this whole land reform thing is supposed to set right the errors of the past and so on. And as you rightly say, and this word transformation, which is a euphemism for revolution, it's being used all the time.
Mm, exactly. So it isn't about transformation. It isn't about righting the wrongs of the past. It isn't about redistribution. It's about war. It's about we will take from you every policy and every law that they sign and that they promulgate and everything is about moving further and further towards some form of autocracy, which means that they can just take. So although the ANC don't formally promote any sort of violence after 1994, the factions within the ANC have constantly advocated this revolution. We need this revolution. We've got to take back the country, and if you don't let us take it back voluntarily, we're going to do so through violence. Now, I mean, that's not a democracy. So you can never turn around and say that you've given up your armed struggle if you're still advocating the violent overthrow of sort of, when the struggle against imperialism and capitalism, it's ongoing. But you cannot find anybody more capitalist than Ramaphosa. I mean, the guy's a billionaire, for God's sake, and he became a billionaire because people handed him money, not because he has any acumen or business ability or anything like that. They just handed him money and he took it. I mean, that's capitalism at its best. I mean, that's theft
Yeah,
capitalism. But anyway.
yeah. Would you say that the ANC was an anachronism? Because it seems to me that they are stuck somewhere in the early 1960s in this sort of Afro-Marxist mode. When some of these African countries became independent, and as in Mozambique and other places, but
Mm,
yeah, Ghana, even
Rhodesia.
with Kwame Nkrumah, they a lot of them did apply kind of Marxist programs, which then completely failed, and it led to famine and economic destruction.
Well,
I think the
yeah.
Swedes actually supported Julius Nyerere in Tanzania And
Yeah, they
I
did.
think they gave him a couple of $1 billion or something. And in a 5-year period, the GDP of Tanzania actually halved as
Yes,
a
that's
result
right.
of all that Swedish money. So it's all a
Didn't
complete
he
mess.
resign, though, admitting that his Marxist socialist policies hadn't worked? Do I remember reading something that he did actually eventually fall on his sword?
Yeah, something to that effect.
Or
Yes,
was kind of pushed out or something like
yes,
that?
yes.
Well, if he did do that, he's about the only African leader ever to acknowledge that he was utterly incompetent and useless and that all of his policies had failed and therefore let me go
Well,
because none of the others.
you also mentioned in one of your Twitter, or rather X talks or spaces, that
Mm.
that the Chinese Communist Party has actually been training some of the ANC people in how one should institute a one-party state
Oh,
in
yes.
South
Oh,
Africa.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Chinese are great. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant at infiltrating. I mean, I've been trying to do a number of exposés on how, I mean, you just need to have a look at what's happening in Limpopo and stuff like that, how virtually the Chinese mafia have moved in on the construction industry, taken over vast tracts of land, destroyed them, bribed ANC officials, and just taken over. And it's all part of it. I mean, I don't know if you know about the scandal where this Chinese spy was caught making cozy with Prince Andrew and David Cameron in that. So, of course, it is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. That Belt and Road Initiative is basically to take Chinese communism and their economic interests and war and take it across the world in a massive swathe in what they call their Belt and Road Initiative. It's just a really smart name for basically taking communism, Chinese style insidious communism, and wiping it across. You should also speak to Willem Petzer. Willem Petzer
Hmm.
did a documentary where he went through Africa, and he said the Chinese influence is un, unfathomable. It is just unbelievable. Everywhere you go, Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, it doesn't matter. You'll see a sign there with English and underneath Mandarin Chinese. And I mean, when you consider that nobody in the country can speak, Mandarin Chinese,
But
why
didn't
are
the
signs in the country?
ANC at one point, I think they introduced Mandarin as a school subject in
Yes,
South Africa. I
yes, they
mean,
were going to make it
you can't
obligatory.
even study German or something. I mean,
I know.
all the Afrikaans schools used to have German uh,
Yes.
prior to 1994. You can't even study German in, big
Yeah, you
European languages like
can't.
German or French or something. But now Mandarin is a
Yeah.
school subject.
Yes. I mean, quite frankly, if we should be speaking a third language, those of us that speak English and Afrikaans, it should be a black language, Zulu or Sotho or something. Why on earth would we want to speak Mandarin Chinese? Yes, I know, massive population, huge influence in that. But yet, I have a lot of friends who have or friends, their children have gone to China for them to speak English. So they want to speak English. There's no chance. English is basically the language of business across the world. And if it stays that way, that's a good thing. Oh no, but that's China. China has had their grips in the ANC for a very, very long time. I mean, I don't know if you know that there was a phone call. I mean, the Chinese Xi Jinping phones up Ramaphosa and says, you must chuck the Taiwanese embassy out. That's why there's been this huge controversy about actually telling the Taiwanese that they can't have an
Yes.
official like consular in the country. And I'm like, who
Yeah,
the
but
hell are
I
you?
don't think it's even that, because I think it's called a representative office or something like that. It's no longer called an
Yeah.
embassy or even a consulate. But
So,
but I think China objected to their having their office in Pretoria, which is the
yes,
capital,
that's right.
and they
That's
told them
right.
to move it
Yes.
to Johannesburg. And I mean,
Johannesburg.
they've owned that building for decades. So why
Yeah,
should they move now? But
exactly.
yeah.
But you see, this is the thing. This is the sort of, I mean, you just have to know the sort of influence that China has on the ANC when you had the meeting in Cape Town of all the Nobel laureates. And, Dalai Lama wasn't allowed to come. So, of course, they had to move it to another country. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just to me such an anathema that a country would have a wonderful event like welcoming all the global Nobel laureates, but because one of them just happens to be the Dalai Lama, who is rightfully and justifiably outspoken against the Chinese, we couldn't have the meeting in Cape Town. I mean, it just shows the problem is that the ANC's muscle memory and institutional memory is that of a liberation struggle terrorist organization. They have never been able to shake it. Never. They can't. All the old guard, all the people that have come up through the ranks have come up with that institutional memory. Everything's a revolution, everything's a battle, everything's a fight. Because if we don't have a fight, what do we have? We don't have anything because we haven't even been able to keep the lights on in this country. One of the most simple, basic first world functions is to be able to roll out electricity and keep it on. And they haven't even been able to do that. So, can you imagine what else? So they just don't have anything to offer.
Well,
And I mean, all you
I
need to
saw
do,
today somewhere, I think on Network 24 or somewhere, that apparently the state owns something like 88,000 buildings,
yeah, not a
and some
problem.
of them are completely derelict. And the state
Yeah,
is actually the biggest property owner in the country.
yeah.
And they're
Well,
not
I can,
doing that, but they want the revolution. They
yeah,
want to take
but this is
even
it.
more.
Hmm? The government owns an enormous property portfolio, absolutely the biggest in the country. But no, 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 no. We will keep it. We won't hand the buildings that we've got or the land that we've got out to those people who are landless. We must take the little bit that the whites have got and take it. But you see, this is the thing. It's not about, and this is why I keep jumping up and down. And this is why you can't get through to people in South Africa because they think, oh, you're preventing us from having land and all the rest of it. And the government wants to take away your land. They want to do the right thing. They don't. They want control. They want absolute autocratic control. And that's what the ANC has wanted. And the ANC allowed so called voting and democracy to carry on because it suited them. At that time, it suited them. They were winning. They were able to do whatever they pleased. They were corrupt. They were stealing left, right, and center. But now that they've lost, they need to get it back again. And now you're going to see the rhetoric starting, them going to the rhetoric and up the temperature. I mean, that comment that somebody made, I wrote about it in my book. I can't quite remember who it was, but it was a friend of Ramaphosa who said that he turned around one day and he said, the whites will be like a frog. We will boil them slowly until they don't realize what's happening and they won't jump out. And that is Ramaphosa's modus operandi. And that is another description for the National Democratic Revolution. Because at the end of the day, all you need to do is see how they have undermined the independence of key democratic structures, the judiciary, the media, civil society organizations. Shamila Batohi is by far the most incompetent and useless, okay, besides maybe Short Abrams, but he was there for such a short time, head of the NPA that we've ever had. Why is she there? She's there because Ramaphosa needs her there. He needs her to be incompetent. Can you imagine if she actually started prosecuting the people that were named in the report from the Zondo Commission? But yet she's been given a blank check to go after old apartheid era crimes where the perpetrators are dead, dead,
Yeah, or
because
in
it's
their
optics.
90s or something like that.
Or
You
in
know,
the
I
80s
still,
and
there,
90s.
there was
Yes.
somebody who was accused of, somebody died in police custody, I think in 1971. Was it Ahmed Timol or someone?
Oh,
And they
yes,
actually
Timor,
got
yeah.
the guy now. Now, I mean, there is all over the world, I think even for murder, there's a statute of
There
limitations,
is, yeah.
I think after 30 years or so, it actually runs out. And I mean, this is what, how long ago? This is 60 years ago. Now they're
Oh,
gonna
this is it.
they're gonna try
Well, I
a
mean, they open,
guy for something that happened 60 years ago.
yeah. But not only that, there's no evidence. I mean, all the evidence is gone. Then they want to call witnesses to come and speak to what happened. So, like, they're opening up the investigation into the Craddock Four. Fine. But the guys who were directly involved in what happened to the Craddock Four are all dead, all gone. So you've got no perpetrator anymore to sue unless you're going to dig him up out of the ground. So, but what they want is they want others to testify. So they've subpoenaed those others, and the others said, okay, you want us to testify, but we need legal representation. They're all still part, they were all still part of the government. Therefore, the government is obliged to pay for their legal representation. Even the judge turned around and ordered the South African Police Services to pay for their representation. And the South African Police Services are refusing to pay for their representation. So on the one hand, Ramaphosa and Shamila Batohi are insisting that they come and testify as to what happened to the Craddock Four, which is fine. It's justifiable. Find out what happened. Have an inquest. But first of all, acknowledge the fact that all the perpetrators are gone. Number one. And number two, if the judge has ordered you to pay for their defense or their representation in the matter, why are you refusing? It's because the police don't actually want any information to come out about what happened, because there are so many ANC hierarchy bigwigs that were apartheid spies that were actually entrenched in giving information to the apartheid security services. And the last thing in the world they want is for any of that to come out. So you've got Russian roulette taking place. You got this, like, like a roulette wheel. No, we want to find out what's going on. So that's Ramaphosa's optics. No. We're not going to pay for their representation, so they're not going to give evidence. So we're at a stalemate, which makes me happy, which makes the ANC happy, because at the end of the day, the ANC doesn't want this coming out. I mean, just what I've learned in the last year about what the ANC was actually up to during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, I'm telling you, will blow your mind.
But
But the people who could,
why was all of this information suppressed before? Do you think, or was
well,
it
I
not suppressed, but it was just kind of lying around in dark corners and nobody knew about it and nobody was interested in digging it up?
think it's pretty much a bit of all of that. I think, first of all, you've got people who fear for their lives, not wanting to talk. Okay, because we've got a pretty vengeful, state structure. We've got a vengeful structure in South Africa. I mean, if you consider that every time somebody wants to investigate corruption, they end up being gunned down. So there is a fear. Then there was definitely this sort of, like, in the changeover in 1994, there was this unwritten agreement, put it that way. It was never put in writing, but it was like between Mandela and de Klerk. You keep quiet about what you did, you keep quiet about what we did, and we'll keep quiet about what you did. And that was some, like, an unwritten sort of rule between de Klerk, or an unwritten agreement between de Klerk and Mandela, is that, yes, we know what our guys did, as in Mandela, and de Klerk says, yes, we know what our guys did. We're just going to keep it quiet so that, for the sake of peace and for the sake of transition from white minority rule to black majority rule without erupting into a civil war, this is how we're going to play it. The problem is that you've got corrupt and you've got disingenuous entities like Ramaphosa, who's now desperate to cling on to power. And because the ANC is losing power, they've got to drag all of this up. They're going to have to drag this up. But the problem is that a lot of the people who can actually testify against them are gone, very conveniently, by the way, because this is what they waited for. Don't think that this was part of the plan. Let all of them die, and then we'll start making a fuss, because actually nobody can confirm or deny. There are still a handful of people out there that can confirm and deny. But with all due respect, would you put your hand up? Would you? I mean, take Eugene de Kock, for example. He took the fall for all of those big guys. He took the fall. He spent 25 years in prison. He's got PTSD. He doesn't sleep at night. He lives on an amount of, sort of drugs and, sort of antidepressants and all the rest. That's his life. That's his life.
Yes, and yeah, he was about the only guy who was really prosecuted. And he, if you think about
So
all
he,
the atrocities committed by the ANC people, they just got almost a blanket
they
amnesty.
did. Yeah.
I mean, in
But I
I
mean,
think around about 1991, de Klerk let out about 4,000 of them who had all been
yeah,
convicted of crimes, violent
yeah.
crimes and murder and so on, and terrorism. And they never even went through the Truth Commission process. But
No,
but the
they
cook
didn't.
himself, he they didn't give him amnesty, and then he had to go to prison for 25 years. And so, I mean, it's a cliche. He sort of paid his debt to society, and then somebody wrote a book about him, I think, I think several books have been written about him. But then, do you remember when he appeared? He attended the France Hoek Literary Festival, and then he was in the audience where the discussion was taking place about some related topic. And then one of
Yeah,
the journalists saw him there and said, you shouldn't be allowed to be here. And then he said, well, in that case, I'll leave, but it just seems to me to be completely absurd. We are governed by people who have actually committed terrorism and violence on a large
exactly.
scale,
Yeah,
and they're
on a
allowed
massive
to be
scale
in
and
government.
continue to do so.
But this guy who spent 25 years in prison and is now a free man, he's not allowed to attend a kind of a literary discussion in
Yeah,
Francouk. It just seems
I wouldn't have
completely
left.
absurd.
I'd have told the journalist. So, no, I mean, that's exactly it. It's sort of like one rule for thee and another for me. That's exactly what South Africa has turned into. And that's what's creating all the animosity and the distrust and the sort of racial fissure that's going on at the moment is because of all of that. And the ANC are just pushing it even more. I mean, they're absolutely pushing it. And I think the final push is the fact that they have basically destroyed our police and they've destroyed the judiciary, and they've now basically interfered in the Constitutional Court because, notwithstanding all the comments about the fact, oh, when the court goes your way, then it's fine, but when it goes our way, it's not. When you have a constitutional court who is supposed to be there to defend the Constitution, basically declaring that somebody standing up and saying that they are going to kill or want to kill a minority in a country, that is protected speech, you have to know your judiciary is finished. And that was the last nail in the coffin of South Africa, was to stack the judiciary with cadres that would make political decisions, not constitutional decisions, which means that when the DA gets to the Constitutional Court with the expropriation without compensation and says it's unconstitutional, the Constitutional Court are going to say, no, I don't think so. I think we'll dismiss it because we've been given instructions by the ANC to do so.
Well,
We interpret the Constitution differently.
I've had it on good authority that all the judges over the last number of years that have been appointed anywhere, in South Africa by the Judicial Services Commission, there are these public hearings where they have to, I mean, they
Yes.
get asked questions and so on, and they
Yeah.
all have to state how politically correct they are and so on. But
Mm,
apparently, there are private discussions with them off the record, and each one of them gets asked, how do you feel about the land issue? And if they
oh,
say that
really?
they
See,
support private property, then they just don't get appointed. And if they say, no,
yeah,
no, I feel that all the land should just be expropriated, then they get appointed to the bench. So the entire bench, even apart from the Constitutional Court, has been packed with people who are against private property and who agree to the notion that land and farms and so on should be expropriated without compensation. So I think, yeah,
Yeah.
more or less cooked.
Well, this is it. It's absolutely, it's captured. Our entire judiciary is captured. The National Prosecuting Authority is captured. They're spending millions on going after old apartheid crimes, but not one person from the Zondo Commission has yet been successfully prosecuted. She's got the lowest prosecution rate out of any NPA head. As far as the research I've been able to do, I'm open to correction, but she has got the lowest rate of prosecution. So it shows she is utterly incompetent. And so that's it. That's your final straw, is when you've got the judiciary that is going to uphold your revolution. So
So,
now you can legitimize your revolution. You're going to turn around and go, but the judiciary is supporting us. So therefore, it's a justified revolution. And that's all the ANC was waiting for, was to be able to say that their revolution was justified.
okay,
They've pursued a
we're
strategy of,
running a little bit out of time,
yeah,
but sort of
right.
finally, would you say we are therefore heading for some kind of revolution in South Africa, some kind of upheaval or?
I think it's inevitable. I think it's inevitable, even if it's not state sanctioned. And this is what I quickly just wanted to say as well, that one of the most glaring examples of the fact that we still, the ANC still in arms trouble, is Julius Malema. They have the EFF as their armed wing. That's their armed wing. He does and says every single thing that Ramaphosa tells him to do. And so there is possibly going to come that moment when Ramaphosa picks up the phone to Malema and says, right, now's the time. Now's the time you tell your people, not yet, but now. And so I still think, sadly, I always felt from 1994 that it was only inevitable, that we hadn't really stopped a civil war. We just prolonged it, that we would inevitably have one because the government wants one. And that's where the ANC has been gearing. The minute you start taking away private property by force, which is exactly what's going to happen, because the judiciary is going to stick up for expropriation without compensation, what do you think is going to happen? Then Malema is going to come into force.
Okay, well, those are ominous words from Nicole Barlow, but I must say she's very convincing, and I think I agree with her. And if you've watched up to now, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and next time we'll see you again. Goodbye. And thank
Thanks,
you very
Dan.
much,
Thanks for
Nicole.
having me on. Bye, everyone.
My pleasure.